Hey everybody, Mike here. Welcome to episode 58 of the Around the Crease Podcast. This week we have another very special guest. This week we have Greg Gurenlian of Team USA, Face-Off Academy, the Professional Lacrosse League, however you want to refer him, but we have Greg Beast on this week's show. And also Michael and I, we talk about his travels from around the country this past week and where he's been, some of the players to watch that he saw, and then we just kind of talk about some of our notebook items from around the country now that we actually have games being played. So it's a very exciting week if you love lacrosse. Let's get into it. All right, I'm here with Greg Gurenlian from Face-Off Academy, US Lacrosse, and a number of other accolades. Coach, appreciate you being on today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, so we're ultimately obviously with you because we're going to talk about the Face-Off. But before we get there, I just kind of want to ask you a couple questions about how did you kind of get started with lacrosse? What drew you to this sport particularly?
I actually never played until high school, and then I basically did everything else. So I did karate and wrestling and basketball and all that stuff. And then when I got to high school at Springfield, the cool kids played lacrosse. So me and a couple of my best friends decided that we were going to go for it. And that's when I started. So my freshman year, the summer before, I picked up a lacrosse stick for the first time and tried to get into it. So it wasn't easy.
Yeah. I guess what made it challenging? Because it sounded like you had a pretty athletic background to begin with. So what made it challenging to pick up that sport versus some of the other things you were doing?
Yeah, so I was saying this to one of my friends yesterday. The thing about lacrosse is you can't fake it. You can fake football. You can be athletic and you can be raw, and you could go to the NFL, and then you just figure it out.
Yeah.
Basketball, you can just be a 6'11" white guy and just hang out on the bench and make $250,000 and you can barely shoot.
Yeah.
You cannot fake lacrosse skill. You have to have the stick in your hand. It has to become part of your body. And no matter how athletic you are, it might get you a foot in the door, like I learned, but you can't do anything until that stick becomes natural, right?
Yeah.
So I got on the field early on by the face-off. I was drawn to it. I was a wrestler, and I gave it a shot. And in my first game that I played in, and I took face-offs, I went 4 for 4, and I was like, okay, now I got to figure out how to cradle and catch and throw. But that's how I got into it, and that's how I kind of stuck.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were drawn to the face-off. What drew you to that specifically?
So the one-on-one nature of it was cool. But I'll be completely transparent. The fact that the ball was on the ground already and I didn't have to catch it I just remember joking that exact sentence to my friend, be like, well, if it's already on the ground, I can do that. And that's literally what drew me to it, because I was like, man, there's a chance for me to get on the field. And that's what really kind of drew my eye. And then once I got used to it, I was like, the reaction on the whistle, the grinding nature of that, like the wrestling part of it, that was all very cool to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to imagine with the wrestling background and karate and stuff like that, very one-on-one, man against man kind of sports. So I can kind of see how those skills could translate, or at least the mindset can translate to that as well. So, thinking about that, from where you got started to where you are now, how have you seen the face-off kind of evolve, either by, the type of person that plays it, or just by how it's used within the sport?
You just mean the different styles of lacrosse? Different styles of athlete?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why lacrosse is so cool, right? If you're not super fast and super strong, there's really not a place for you on a football field. If you're not tall or insanely good at dribbling, there's no space for you on a basketball court. When you look at lacrosse, there are guys who are 5'2" who can be All-Americans. There are guys who are huge that are a little bit, so you have defenders can be big, or defenders can be short but with really good positioning, right? You got a Mike Earhart who can take over the World Games, but also a BJ Grill who's a much shorter stature, but he's just very disciplined and he gets to the right spots and he puts his stick right on your hands. So anybody of any size, and then you also have people, the Canadian style, maybe you're really, really good with one hand, right? You could do everything, or a more of an American style where you can go both ways. I think the imagination of lacrosse is what's so cool. And I think that's why hockey players gravitate towards lacrosse, because it's a very creative game.
Yeah.
So regardless of what stature you are, big, strong, shorter, whatever, but you also have the creativity aspect of it, I think makes it so unique.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, speaking of the height thing, I remember talking with someone, it was years and years ago, I was watching Matt Blondo. He had just finished his senior season at St. Andrews down in Florida, and he's 5'2", little guy, obviously spent a lot of time in the gym. I think he was wearing a shirt like Lax Sun Gym or something like that, because obviously in Florida, he had a pretty good tan too. But yeah. And I asked him that same question. I was like, what drew you? And he was like, well, I'm 5'2". I can't play football. He's like, because everybody just looks at him and can't play.
Yeah.
It's like they automatically, you get judged.
Just write you off.
Yeah, I covered football for many years. There's that box that you kind of got to fit into if you're going to play a certain position. He's like, I'm too short for basketball. He's like, lacrosse perfect. He's like, because you get to pick. He's like, I can play attack. He's like, and I'm good at it. But it was a sport he was able to fit in. So that was kind of how, and that for me is one of the things I love about the sport too. Is like you don't have to fit into a box. I mean, it helps to be big and fast, but it's one of those like
no
you can
one
find
looks
a
at
position.
You and goes, oh, you look like a lacrosse player.
Yeah.
Right. Like that. Like you could be, huge guys on campus. You're like, okay, that's either a football player or a basketball player, or even hockey guys kind of have their look. Like lacrosse players come in all kinds of different shapes and different sizes.
Yeah, exactly. So, as far as the position itself, like, I remember it's probably 2008, 2009. I had just started covering lacrosse for ESPN. I remember it was at a Jake Reed event in North Carolina. And I remember just standing on the sideline. Of course, a parent approaches me at some point, and I'm looking at it, and I mentioned some kid, and I don't remember the kid's name, but he was a face-off guy. And they were like, oh, what do you think of him? And of course, I'm automatically assume it's the kid's parent. Not that I would have said anything derogatory anyway, but I was like, oh, he's skillful. He's like obviously fast. He's good. And they're like, yeah, but he's just a Fogo. Like, and it was like, I was still relatively new to covering the sport, but I could hear, because I remember hearing it from, I grew up playing baseball in North Carolina. And like, oh, he's just a reliever. Like, there's that tone that you get. Is that something you ever experienced, or is it obviously you're familiar with it? But like, what do you think whenever you hear people kind of comment like that? And has it changed at all in the last 5 or 6 years?
Fogo is literally a 4-letter word, and you know what? I hate being called a Fogo. I played offensive midfield and man up at Penn State until I graduated. I didn't become a quote unquote face-off specialist until the MLL.
Yeah.
And what I hate about I think the uneducated about our position specifically, look at face-off guys as like the D-backs of lacrosse, right? Every single D-back, no matter what you do, that's, he drops an interception. That's why he plays defense, because he can't catch a throw. Or maybe the D-back is the best D-back, and you need him more than you needed him as a receiver in college, and that's why he ended up as an NFL D-back.
Right.
Same thing with lacrosse. Guys end up being quote-unquote Fogos because they're the best face-off guy on their team. Now, that's not to say there's plenty of guys out there. There are plenty of guys out there who put themselves in that box.
Yeah.
They sit on a knee. They guess on the whistle. Back in the early 2000s and the 90s, they cheated, and they just put themselves in that box where they didn't work on any other stuff. Yeah. But plenty of guys, I would say by far the majority, are like me, where we played full midfield, forward and backwards, never came off the field in high school.
Yeah. Barely
came off the field in college. But at some point, your coach says to you, look, I need you to face off because you're our best face-off guy.
Right.
So at Penn State, every year we tried to put me on a regular midfield rotation, and every year I said the same thing. Like, I'm either going to be an elite-level face-off guy and not many shifts on offense, or I'm going to have shifts on offense and be a subpar face-off guy. Because the energy it takes to face off at that level against other guys of that caliber takes everything out of you.
Yeah.
And the position has grown so high now where, even when I was in college, there were plenty of guys out there who faced off, but you could tell they weren't specialized. Face-off instruction wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So now every week is an elite level guy from somewhere, no matter where you are.
Yeah. So do you think well, I'm never going to say the attitude will have totally changed because as we know, like there's always going to be people out there that will keep that opinion no matter what. But do you think just that perception? Because I mean, I look at the position, and I remember talking to Justin Shockey when he was finishing his senior year at Landon, and he was actually, I picked him as my player of the year because after talking with all the coaches, they're like, you don't get those opportunities without a guy like that. Joey Epstein was putting the ball in the net that year, but if it wasn't for Justin, they would have had a lot. He would have had a lot less opportunities. And I looked at him like, man, to be able to play that position at such a high level and do it against some of the best competition, I'm like, that's work. So I guess I never understood the perception that people thought, like, oh, because I always got the idea from those comments. I was like, oh, they somehow think it's a lesser position or a lesser player, like, oh, you don't do everything. But I'm like, well, Tackman, they're not playing defense. No. Like, they're not back there, playing deep hole.
It's such a shockingly ignorant comment to make. Yeah. Like, I don't like the term FOGO because when you say the word FOGO, you think like those, like the chubby little cheating guys back in like the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Like I like face-off specialist or face-off athlete.
Yeah.
But there are so many holes in that argument, right? Like nobody ever says Tom Brady's not a great football player,
right?
Because my argument would be like, well, he's never caught a pass,
right?
He doesn't hike the ball, he doesn't play defense, so how can you possibly say that?
Yeah.
For some reason, specialization in every single sport is okay.
Yeah.
Like, right, let me throw Quint Kesnick under the bus because I love doing that. Quint talks about how Fogos are the worst lacrosse players on the field. Quint, I never saw you take an offensive run in college. All you did was stand in the goal and get hit.
Yeah.
So, but I don't put down goalies because I think they're psychopaths.
Yeah.
It takes somebody special to be a goalie.
Takes a mindset.
So I don't know why there's a waste of time of downing something, and it's always the same. You don't understand it.
Yeah.
So rather than take the time to understand it, let's just bash it because it's hilarious to you. So.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with one of my friends. Her daughter just played in this city championship game here for basketball, and I remember we got to talk about Dennis Rodman and just how impressive it was, like, because he knew his skill set and like he knew his position, especially when he got to the Bulls, and like he is probably the greatest rebounder the NBA will ever see. It's like, because he wasn't worried about all the other stuff. Like, he focused on his craft and focused on that position. It's like, and to your point, like, no one ever says he wasn't a good basketball player.
No.
Like, it's just like,
you're right.
He was so dominant at the one thing, like, he did the stuff no one else wanted to do. So, for me, like, I definitely, like, whenever I talk about him, like, I always talk about face-off specialist rather than, like, people say Fogo, and I'm like, wow, I was like, I look at it and like, but I have seen games where the kid takes the face off and immediately runs off the field. But then again, there's other guys that I see. Like, I watched Gavin Ty play at the Under Armour underclassmen games last year, and he'd get it, and every time he won, he'd almost just run down the field and put the ball in the net or make a pass.
He's not nicknamed Hammer by accident for sure.
Yeah, it was so I'm just like, it's like, all right.
I will say this, though. The limitation for a lot of us is the equipment. So, we just came out with that ECD head because the whole idea was to find a head where it would maintain its shape.
Yeah.
And I always tell the guys the same thing. I'm like, look, if guys, like when I played for the Lizards, they would make fun of me, right? Like, look at this head, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, look, I should get a medal for the fact that I can pass the ball anywhere with a head that's completely torqued to the side,
right,
caked in mud with the mesh stuck in the back, right?
Yeah.
So, we were always limited by that. Every face-off guy right now understands the struggle of in practice or even in like game day. You have line drills, you have one stick.
Yeah. And
then when you're facing off, you have your face-off stick. And that's what we're trying to get rid of. We're trying to get rid of that limitation.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue because I was going to ask you about, obviously the Weapon X. How long, I guess, have you guys been... Because I have to imagine it's been a long time in the making. Like, that's not something you just come up with the idea and next week you just like, all right, we gotta put it out. No. Like, how long have you guys been working on this?
So you got to remember, East Coast Dyes is a small operation.
Yeah.
So this isn't a giant conglomerate that prints out multiple sports. Like, they are the lacrosse community. So what's been so impressive with them is we have met so many times. It's been over a year where we have met. I would drive to Baltimore. We would go over all the possibilities of a head. We would go to the technicians, and they would print out a 3D model, and we would test it. And we did that off and on. And then once we had the shape right, getting the right plastic took a good 8 months.
Yeah.
To make sure it was perfect. And then once we thought we were close, I would go and face off with a whole bunch of college guys and literally try to break it.
Yeah.
And then we'd come back to the drawing board and say, okay, these are the weaknesses. Where can we fix it? So it was a long time in the making.
Yeah. I mean, so well, I won't guess. The term Weapon X, because I know when I was watching your video the other day, because it forms that X when you look at it from the side, like, was that just a byproduct of, all that testing and everything? Or was that kind of part of like, oh, we need a cool name? Because, I mean, you're not going to get a better name than that.
I will admittedly say that I wasn't all in on that name.
Yeah.
That was all the East Coast Dice geniuses. They said Weapon X, and I was like, look, I'm all for cheesy comic book cool stuff. So me personally, Weapon X is cool.
Yeah.
My thought was, dads are going to think that's a badass name. Kids are going to roll their eyes. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Yeah. Every kid thought, like, when you said Weapon X, they're like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I was totally wrong. That's why I don't do the marketing. But yeah, so Weapon X was all ECD. That was all of them.
So yeah, I mean, wait till Marvel's got Wolverine now, so they'll probably come out with a badass Weapon X, Weapon X storyline. It'll kind of be one more thing.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. So what for your position, like since it came out, what has the reception been? I mean, obviously everybody likes the name, but what kind of reception have you seen online from people? Because it's not. Is it? I think we're recording this on the 21st. It just went on sale today, right?
Yeah, midnight. Yeah, last night.
Okay.
I am blown away. I mean, I woke up this morning, my phone was bonkers.
Yeah.
I texted the guys at ECD today. I was like, I can't believe how many kids bought this thing at midnight.
Yeah.
Like, people waited up. I've never seen that for lacrosse equipment anywhere.
Yeah.
There's multiple Lacrosse Unlimiteds and Universal Lacrosses that have reported they're sold out.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. I'm really excited. So the reason it's kind of touching for me is, look, I'm old, man. I'm turning 35 on Saturday, and the fact that I'm even a person kids listen to at all, because I know how fast sports move, is very touching to me. The fact that I know all my Westchester guys have seen the head. I've been using it. So many college guys, have reached out about trying it. I'm just really pumped that people respect me enough to say, wow, Greg's doing this. I want to give it a shot at least. So I'm really happy about that part.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be even that much more thrilling the first time you see a kid facing off with that. That's got to be another moment.
Kid showed up at my draw day last night. No lie. A 2021 came to my draw day last night who comes a lot. He asked if he could use the head. I had one. I gave it to him. He won my draw day. He beat some of the top seniors in the country. Won my draw day last night, and I was like, dude, just keep it. And then I texted Jerry, and I go, you'll never get, kid used my head and won. He goes, same thing happened in Jersey last night.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, let's just let this ride, man. Let's just see how it goes.
Yeah,
I just love the fact that I can go to the high school across the street, help out there at Mamaroneck, and rip shots on the goalies full speed like I used to in college.
Yeah.
And then I can face off with a head, and I've never had that before. So
yeah. That's great. That's great. So I do want to ask, because you mentioned some of the young guys. What do you think it makes? Is that Jax?
Sorry, Jax is making a guest appearance. All right, go ahead.
That's fine. I love your Instagram post. Whenever you got him, it was hilarious. I saw the wrestling one today. Cracked me up. Yeah. What do you think it is to makes a face-off man special? Like, is there a particular aspect that you kind of see in most athletes?
Yeah. So, obviously there's certain skill sets that are involved, right? There's the natural hand speed. There's a nervous system reaction that people have to naturally have. No. Sorry.
That's fine.
So people have to have a nervous system reaction. That has to be natural, right? And I tell guys all the time, the biggest questions I get are, how do I improve my hand speed? Mm-hmm. And they also ask, how do I get my reaction better? And I always tell them the same thing. Your reaction's good, because if it wasn't, you couldn't play this position. Mm-hmm. You would have gotten pumped 0 for 8, and you would have been like, nope, I'm out. I'm bad at this. So you have to have a natural knack for it to start. And I always tell people, it's like sprinting. You can take anybody and make them faster,
right?
But you can't make a slow person fast, right? Like, your nervous system is your nervous system. You can always improve upon it, but
right.
You can't just change it.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Find out. That's why I always tell coaches, if you have high school tryouts, you have a club tryouts, 6th, 7th grade, let every kid who wants to try try facing off.
Yeah.
Because you'll never know who's good, right? Nobody ever would have guessed that I would have been good when I was in high school. So let them try. And then once they have that natural nervous system reaction, the two things, that's the one thing you can't teach, right? You can't teach a kid to be fast. So if they have that, you can work on it.
Yeah.
The other thing that is the intangible that I'm always looking for, and I always sell to college coaches when it comes time to recruiting, is the coachability. There are so many kids, 99% of kids out there that want to be good enough, right? Even guys who are multiple-time All-Americans in high school, they get to a point where it goes from, yes, coach, thank you, coach, to, okay, to I'm not even listening to you anymore.
Yeah.
Then they get pumped one day on ESPN. Then they want to listen a little bit. It's too late by then.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for the special kids that always want to continue to get better. So when people ask me about Trevor Baptiste, TD, Alex Woodall, those three guys, watch them their freshman year of college or even in high school. Yeah. Watch them now and look at how much they've improved. Alex Woodall is a shocking case. If you look at his film at High Point, his freshman year, and you look at him now, you would swear it's not the same person. Stance, technique, footwork, everything is so different.
Yeah.
And I always say, once in a while, a very special person comes along who has a natural knack for something, and they find it, right? So somebody who was almost born to do this position finds it. And then on top of that, they never want to stop evolving. That's when you find somebody like a Trevor or a TD or an Alex Woodall.
Yeah. How hard, you mentioned he doesn't look like the same player. How hard is it for a player like that to change the way they go about the faceoff? Like I think back to, I was an Orioles fan, and I'm thinking about Cal Ripken. He would change his stance from literally at bat to at bat when he was in a slump kind of thing. So, and I was like, and I played baseball, and I knew how hard it was to try and because so much is timing. Like stuff's coming. You got it's based on it's like a domino effect. How much of a challenge is that for a faceoff guy to change the way they kind of go about it?
It's so the cool thing about faceoffs is unlike most positions, right? Even baseball, if you're a batter, even though you're technically using the same mechanics, the ball's coming at you from different angles, right? There's different rotations, spins on the ball, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You're trying to hit it to different parts of the field, etc. When you face off, it's one of the very few spots in any sport where it's always the same every single time. The ball is the same spot. Your body's in the same spot. You don't need your eyes open to clamp a lacrosse ball.
Yeah. Now,
you need hand-eye coordination after the ball comes out. But other than that, everything's consistent. So the cool thing for me as a coach is, because I was a strength coach first, and we always used to break down the biomechanics, use slow motion film study. That's what I do with my guys now. So when I tell them, I'm saying, look, I know that you're doing it this way, and I know you're beating other seventh graders right now. But if I can guarantee you biomechanically that this is the better way to do it, if you can listen now, I swear you will be able to reach your potential. It was easy. It was hard at first because with the FOA, if you watch game film, I was talking about this with Angelo Petrakis, who's a senior this year at Massapequa. He's going to be an All-American. He's going to Cornell next year. We were talking about how much the faceoff has changed. And I told him, I said, I dare you, try to find film before 2012 when the FOA started. Watch the NCAA tournament. Watch all those games. Every team had a different faceoff stance. It was all over the place. Yeah. Total wild, wild west. Half the guys were cheating. It was a mess. You look at it today, at least 99% of the guys that you watch on TV at least have their right knee pointing towards the ball and their right toe locked.
Yeah.
Right? It's consistency because we created this system based on biomechanics. So when we first started, people thought we were nuts, right? Don't cheat. Get out of here. Who are these guys? And then we started telling them, go sideways into the ball instead of facing up north. That was mind-blowing. Now everyone's got it, but it took a while to get people on board. Then when you saw the proof was in the pudding, now we're at a point where now too many quote-unquote FOGO coaches are out there. So now there's too much information. So you'll find a kid, and I always say this, if a parent comes, like, hey, this is Billy, he's never faced off before. I'm like, that's awesome. Because I'd much rather get a kid who's never done this before than to have to deal with retroactive interference and a kid who's been training for 10 years the wrong way.
Yeah.
Because he's not going to want to change right away. It's going to feel awkward, and no high school kid wants to feel awkward at a thing that he's already decent at.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Bad habits are hard to break for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 100%.
All right. You kind of mentioned a couple kids. I kind of want to wrap up because obviously I run a high school site, and you've seen a lot of kids. Who are some of the? And I know there's going to be too many. You don't want to leave anybody out. But if you had to pick 5 kids that you think, you mentioned one out of Massapequa. Who are 5 or so kids that you think are coming up that have the potential to be the special? I'm not going to say another Trevor Baptiste because I'm sure those guys don't come around very often.
Yeah,
but
nor should they try to be.
Yeah.
No, I can tell you out of the 2019s, Gavin Ty, as you know, Tyler Sandoval, who's going to Princeton, Connor Calderon is going to Maryland, Eric Pacheco is going to Loyola next year, Angelo Petrakis, who's going to Cornell, Matt Gunty down in the DMV area. Mm-hmm. He's going to Brown. Tegan Boltman. Actually, I think Tegan's a 2020. But yeah, and then the younger Ginder, Kobe Ginder, he's a 2020. Ball is going to Yale. He's a 2020. So, I mean, but out of that 2019 group, those are some of the top names off the top of my head.
Yeah.
That I would say are going to be immediate impact guys at the schools they go to.
Yeah. And when you look at that, because you mentioned Woodall and where he started, where he came from, is there any guys you think out there they haven't hit their stride heading into their senior year, maybe they're in their senior, but you've seen them progress so much? Because I look at Gavin, I'm I looked at, because he played as an 8th grader at Penn Charter.
Yes,
he has consistently improved every single year. I mean, he had a phenomenal year for Penn Charter. And I'm looking at the teams he plays, and I'm like, that makes it even more impressive. So I look at him, I'm like, has he even reached his potential, or is he just getting better? Are there any other kids that you're like, oh, this kid's still maybe getting better, and he's maybe only a senior, may not be a household name now, but watch out?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of those kids, and those are the kids that come down to coachability, where it's kind of like Christian Lacosta is going to St. John's Fisher. Mm-hmm. If he had another 2 years under his belt of playing the sport and this position, I've seen him pump D1 guys. So I know for a fact there's a perfect example of a kid who, if he had a couple more years, there's a kid, Jack Fine, who won our 2020 division at the National Showcase this year out of Rosslyn. He's only been playing a couple of years. He's going to go to Avon, and he's going to do an extra year. So mm-hmm. he's going to be a 2021. That's going to open up the whole world to him. He'll be able to play anywhere.
Yeah.
So there are certain kids when you're a freshman or sophomore and you're raw that get an extra year to kind of, go under the belt. I think the kids who benefit the most are the kids on the West Coast or the South, who then end up coming up. If they go to an East Coast college, maybe they're within distance of us and we can work with them more often than we used to.
Yeah.
So those are going to be some of the kids to look out for sure. There's a kid who's at Ohio State right now as a freshman, Anthony Mayo, who's playing behind Justin Inacio and Christian Feliciani. He's a Cleveland area kid. I think he's going to continue to progress. I think he'll be a name in the next couple of years in the Big Ten.
And what was his name again? Just so everybody.
Anthony.
Your sound literally cut out.
Sorry, Anthony Mayo.
Mayo. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to make sure we got his name. I was like, oh, what are the odds of the sound cutting out twice?
Yeah.
All right, Coach. Well, again, I cannot thank you enough. If anybody doesn't know, the Weapon X is also out today, so you can go out and buy it today. And tell everybody where they can find you online and everywhere else as well.
Sure. Yeah. If you go to youtube.com/Greg Gurenlian, that's my YouTube channel. I have a thing called the Beast Lab. I post videos every week, just free informational stuff and equipment reviews for coaches and players. And then at GregBeast32 on both Instagram and Twitter. And then if you're ever interested in having the Face Off Academy come to your town and want to host us for training, it's thefaceoffacademy.com.
Okay. And of course, when the PLL comes to your town, you can see you live and in person.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Coach. Thank you very much, and you have a great evening.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All right, bye. All right, Michael. So we're back again with another episode, and you've been quite a busy guy over the last week with some trips going on, right?
Yeah, I think I think I'm busy now. I think it's going to get worse as the season goes on, but this is what I've signed up for. I started the week in Kentucky and ended the week in Ohio, and I can tell you what happened from the beginning to end. The first, I went to go see Culver Prep again play St. Xavier in Kentucky, who I think is, I know they're not in the Midwest, so I know they're not in my purview, so to speak. But I think they are going to be a strong, strong team. But again, like I've seen with Prep, they're just too good. I mean, they're too good for a team that's a normal high school team.
Right, and I mean they're probably too good for even some teams that wouldn't be considered a normal team. Right. I mean, we've cut. I mean, anybody who listened to that, I think probably 2 weeks ago, know like we've kind of covered Culver and realized like they play on a different level than most of the teams that we will normally talk about, and we realize that, and but they are conveniently located for you, so it's very easy to go see them, and they're one of those programs that, because of their stature, a lot of the other top teams play them, so it's kind of the convenient, like makes it easy for you to see some of those other teams.
Yeah, it makes it a measuring stick when I could compare that. So I can compare St. X, how they did. Then I also saw them play Carmel later in the week, HSC earlier, McCallie. So, I mean, again, it's not an apples to apples thing, because they might be on a little more, they might be playing a little different, but it's just good to see how the other teams react. So like I said, St. X, I think is going to be a strong team. They have some really great players, and and my player of the game was Alex Stathakis, the face-off.
Yeah. And
he's going to Denver.
He's a big guy.
he is a beast. I think he's weighing in at about 245, and I don't think there's any fat on him.
Yeah.
He's solid. He's solid, but the scary thing about him is the quickness. Yeah. So that's when you say a D1 athlete, you go, they're big and they're fast and they're quick.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, his moves are so smooth that it's make it take it. And once they start getting on you, it's like you panic. You can't get him. So I mean, this guy just wins. As I said, I go, if you beat him, keep the ball. That's a keepsake,
right?
Because you'll be hearing about him. He might become, he might go up there as one of the top face-off guys if he continues on this trajectory.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what your future guest says about that, because I think he's worked with him at one point. I know he's worked with the backup face-off person, Little Alec. Yeah. So they go Big Alec and Little Alec. I know Little Alec, who is the backup, who has worked with the Beast, knows about him. So that'd be interesting later when you get to talk to him about that. So that was the first game, and again, I'm not going to bash a team for getting beat up by this team. I'm looking forward to seeing. We should know the results by the time this airs of how they do out east.
Right.
Because I think they're going there this weekend. Yes. This upcoming week, delayed. So that'll be interesting. Personally, if they lose a game out there, I'll be really shocked. And I know they're playing tough teams.
Right.
I'll be shocked if they lose. That's how good they look in every spot. So. I mean,
they have been dominant in the wins they've had thus far. But I will say, like, the teams they're playing out east are a different makeup. I don't want to say like different caliber of team, but they have different. I think they're probably deeper teams. Like they can run more guys, more quality guys out there for longer. So their starting line probably doesn't get tired chasing these guys down. But that being said, Culver Academy can run a number of lines out there as well. So I think they're probably more evenly matched in that respect.
I mean, again, as we've talked, they have 19 D1 players on their team.
It's ridiculous.
So they all can't play. But like, you can't shut anyone off. So I don't bash anyone playing them. Like I said, these are learning experiences for them. Yeah. It will be interesting. I'm looking forward to that this weekend. For Culver, so we'll talk about that later.
And I mean, that's why they're a good team to see these other teams play, because then when they go back east, you kind of start to get an idea. It's like, all right, if they go out and beat a boys Latin 26-1, then that would be a holy crap moment to begin with for many reasons otherwise, but you can kind of start to see where like, all right, how would a boys Latin maybe stack up against a Carmel or a St. Xavier? Like you kind of start to look at scores and see, and I know it's not always exact, but I mean,
right.
This also isn't professional or college sports where these teams will eventually play it out. So that's what you got to do, like when you're trying to rationalize this stuff as well.
Right. I mean, it's just you can't make for a team from the Midwest who doesn't have the depth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a knock. It's just the truth. You can't make a mistake.
Yeah.
Because you're never getting the ball back if you make a mistake.
Right.
And that's what happens. And then they get on you. And then it's like a snowball effect. So anyway, that was a great game. It was fun to watch. I can't wait to watch St. X of Kentucky more. I know they play some teams. They play a bunch of teams in Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. So that's a nice little team that comes up and is gonna put a hurting on some teams. I think people might overlook them, maybe thinking, oh, Kentucky's not that good. Well, they're gonna see this team. They have a stud goalie, they have a stud attackman, they have a stud midi, and they are fun to watch. So I can't wait to see them. The next game I went to was a local game here, Westfield versus North Central. North Central's a brand new team. Well, they're not brand new, but they're not the best team. They don't have the talent.
Still still kind of working through the program, and
I just don't think it's that kind of school where it's a public school that it has the interest in it. I know they've been playing for a while. They had some nice players, but they played against Westfield, who has 3 really quick, really good attackmen. And again, once you get down, it's hard. If you don't have the horses to get into it, it just keeps coming. Now, Westfield poured it on a little bit. And that's why my player was Jack Green. There was a couple other players who scored, I think, or one other player who scored like 8 or 9 goals. And it was just face off, pass, shoot. And I'm like, if you're winning by that much, every goal should have an assist. In my feeling, like every goal it shouldn't be an unassisted goal when you're thumping somebody. It should be move the ball, shoot.
Yeah.
But Jack Green, the person who I made as my player of the game, he moved the ball around. He's also very talented.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see this team play some of the bigger boys in Indiana.
Yeah.
Because I can't get a read on them right now. I mean, they look like world beaters, but I don't know. Because the talent they've gone up against isn't top level talent.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're still early in the season too, so that's one of those like we're every now and then, like, I mean, I don't think it's quite teams are scheduling cupcakes early in the season. It's not like Alabama's playing Division III school kind of getting an early game in under your belt. But these out of conference games, they're generally when you get into the conference, that's when you really start to kind of get in the meat of your schedule. When you face those you face the rivalries, you face a tougher competition because it's teams that know you. They play you year in, year out. Like, I mean, I don't know what the rivalry between these two programs is like, but it could just easily be one of those results like, hey, this may be one of the first times they've met, or early on, or maybe it's just kind of like they meet every year, but it's just kind of maybe it's just they're not even.
Right. But the stat that they said at that game, it was like the halftime announcement, and they said these were the first two public schools in Indiana to play the game. Like they played each other, was those first 2 teams. So North Central's been around.
Right.
I just don't think it's a lacrosse program.
Right.
And it's a fledgling. So when I say fledgling, I don't mean it's new. I just mean it's not has been as important as other schools have been.
Right. And I mean, probably nobody in Indiana, I mean, when I think Indiana, I think basketball. So it's probably not a shock that lacrosse may not be the first thing to come to people's mind whenever they're talking about like what sport is going to get the most support out of the school. Like,
right. That's exactly it. So there is a top 2, 3, 4 of following 5, 6, 7, 8 maybe, and then it really sort of drops off. I was just speaking with somebody who's involved in in Indiana lacrosse, and I said this might be the case of making a 2-division, like Illinois did at one point,
right?
Division 1, Division 2.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't even play those teams because it could really demoralize somebody, just getting beat on. And then that doesn't help grow the game. And again, I'm all about growing the game.
Yeah.
And then when you win Division 2, if you become that championship, you have the opportunity to move up to Division 1.
Yeah.
So I think that would be a model to work on for this type of thing. But you know what? It was down the street. I love to go out and watch high school, so I went there. So that was a nice game. The next game was the game I was very interested in seeing, and that was Carmel, Indiana, where I live right now, against Zionsville. Carmel is perennially a powerhouse. It's a very large public school. They win in everything. Last year they didn't. I mean, they do. It's crazy, and I get a very big kick out of it that nobody else in Indiana likes them. So,
yeah. And
it's funny.
I'll have to throw my anecdote because me and my wife were actually in Carmel, as you know, Carmel this past weekend. We were there for a race for both runners, and we just made the comment, like she asked me when we were walking down their main street, and every store had, I think some of them like hashtag we'll be back, but they were obviously celebrating the local high school team in some fashion. I mean, it was literally one of those things like most people are probably familiar with the movie Friday Night Lights, whenever, all the windows and all the stores were decorated. It was exactly like that. People had banners and balloons, and the windows were written on and stuff like that. And I think I was talking to you, I think you said the men's basketball team was in the championship game, and
championships this weekend.
And the women had gone to the semifinals. So
yeah, they lost to the big rival HSC,
so they were obviously
HSC loved. Yeah,
everybody in the town was obviously very proud, and you could tell very, very well supportive of the athletic program there.
Yeah. So, I mean, funny enough, so the basketball team is in the state championship for the second year in a row, and the tickets went on sale at their school today, and kids were lined up at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
That's a little
you're
crazy.
Talking like that kind of support.
Right. So to see them, the lacrosse team, not make it to the finals last year, I mean, I think you said, I don't remember what the actual year, how many years it has been that it's either been a Carmel or a Cathedral in the championship, and neither of them were in it.
Yeah.
And Carmel lost some very good players last year, so I didn't know what to expect. And they were playing Zionsville, which Zionsville I have as a top 5 team. It's a neighbor suburb. It's a nice rivalry. The former coach, or the coach of Zionsville, was the former assistant coach at Carmel under Tom Coons. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking there might have been a little bit of bad blood. So I'm like, this is going to be it's going to be a very good test.
Right.
I knew Zionsville. I knew they would be coached very well. I knew they'd be very disciplined and very tough.
Yeah.
Because that's what Tom Coons was, and I know his coach Rundle, would follow in the same model.
Yeah.
So I was very shocked to see Carmel come out and really put it on them in their first game.
Yeah.
They looked better than they did last year. More balanced, which, when you lose a All-American,
right,
you never want to say, oh, we lost an All-American, we got better, but the ball might have gone through the All-American more.
Right. You tend to run your offense around maybe your best player, and maybe it's a case of other players now get their time to step up as well. Now that they're
So now there was a player my player of the game was Tommy Sprates. He is a big physical athlete. I've seen him play since his sophomore year, and every time I'd see him play, he was the one I was drawn to. He's big, he's fast, he's strong, and everyone in the state knows it, except I think people giving him recognition. Like, he did not make an all-state team last year, and I think he's probably the best player in the state.
Okay.
He has an absolute cannon for a left. But everyone knows he has a cannon for his left, so everyone was playing his left.
Right.
So the reason he got my player of the game was he went righty and scored.
Yeah.
And actually on his first goal he scored righty. He ran back to the sideline and held up his right hand and was pointing at it. So there was some great players out there. Marcus Prine at attack, who was so quick, and so they are really loaded. I mean, they are really loaded. So I can't wait to see. Then I wanted to see them play Culver, and it didn't work out well a couple days later.
Right.
So the day after that, I went and saw an interstate game.
Yeah.
St. Rita of Chicago. It's a Catholic Southside School, who you wouldn't ever say would be on the radar in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're good in all sports. They're good in football. They weren't great in hockey, and all of a sudden now they're one of the top hockey teams. So you knew eventually lacrosse would catch up.
Right.
Well, it caught up. So St. Rita came to HSE. So Chicago came to Indy to take on the defending state champions. And they won. Now, it was a great. First of all, it was super windy that day. If you remember, I don't know if it was like 25, 30 mile an hour winds. And it was cold. So the conditions, a pass, you'd see the ball move.
Yeah. You got to adjust for the wind.
Right. But I want to say, I thought HSE sort of controlled the ball more, moved the ball around more. And St. Rita's goalie, Eric Seo, who was my player of the game, was the difference.
Yeah.
Was the difference in the game. Now, St. Rita has some strong players. I mean, they have some strong players. Like, I talked to the coach afterwards, and I said, who's this player and who's this player? And he's like, you'll hear about him next year for lacrosse if he doesn't end up playing football in the Big Ten. And I'm like,
Yeah, there you go.
And they have another player, Jack Dolan, who's going to Jacksonville.
Uh-huh.
So they have talent.
Yeah.
Now, they tied the game up on a last second shot. So it was HSE's. There was 2 seconds left, shot, goal, stunned. And then they won it in overtime. So,
right.
But it was great to see a team from Chicago, a city school, Catholic League school, come to Indiana and knock off a state champ. They then had to go back to Illinois 2 days later.
Yeah.
And play the Illinois state champ, Loyola Academy.
Yeah.
And they lost 9-6. They started the game winning 3-0, which that was a big news as I heard on that Saturday was that the start of that game. So that's a team I'm going to be watching a lot is St. Rita.
Yeah, obviously
they're going to make some noise
to face that quality competition in their first couple games of the year and to play well in both. I mean, 2 very close losses.
And they lost to Trinity by 1.
Yeah. At
Trinity. I mean, that's a team going for it. I love their coach. He's a great guy. The passion, that's the kind of thing that, you see in sports. Like, if I always judge a coach, like, would I have my kid coach that?
Right.
Would I be happy if he was coaching my son?
Yeah.
Is he a leader of men? And he's a leader of men. So, all power to him. I'm happy for St. Rita. They were a rivalry for me growing up, but I'm all about that kind of thing. So, but again, Hamilton Southeastern, HSE, they're not going anywhere either. I mean, they have. I don't want to say it was a fluke, but it was one of those games where you said somebody had to lose. You didn't want anyone to lose, but that's what it was. Right. I just think that'll make HSE a better team. I think it's going to make St. Rita a better team.
Yeah,
which makes it better for everybody.
Yeah. Now I know you have your next game is the Culver Carmel game. But yeah. I think we've probably talked about those 2 teams enough. If anybody wants to read it, they can go to the laxrecords.com and they can see the Ward report and they can kind of get the recap of that. But I think for me and what most other people might find interesting is you ended up going to Ohio as well. So talk a little bit about that Ohio trip.
Right. So the Ohio Machine had a high school showcase, which I want to applaud the Ohio Machine. That's exactly what it's all. They're trying to raise the level of high school lacrosse in Ohio. And I look at that as Ohio is probably the leader as far as depth, talent in the Midwest.
Right.
They have probably the quantity of teams and strength of those teams is the most. Now, I'm sure Michigan people are going to get upset about it.
I was going to say it's at MFW Shy for all those in Michigan.
Right. I'm sure people in Illinois, but you have teams in Cleveland, teams in Columbus, teams in Cincinnati. I mean, there's 3 cities and they all have their areas. So it's just the depth. But the Ohio Machine had this 2-day event where they had 6 boys' high school games, 2 girls' high school games at Fortress Obetz, which I think is a cool name. It's the Machine's home stadium. I believe it's the first lacrosse-only stadium that was made for professional lacrosse.
Okay.
And it's made out of shipping containers. Like the whole fortress, it looks like a fortress, and it's all black shipping containers. The offices are there.
Yeah.
It's a cool place. It was an old racetrack that they built it. It is a very nice facility. So I got to see. I couldn't go the first day, but the first day there was some great games. Dublin Kaufman played the first day. Saint Xavier played the first day. Archbishop Bowler played the first day. I mean, these are all when you put the top teams in Ohio,
right?
I'm rattling them off right now. I mean, these are the ones, and to get that early season, to get them all in one place to do that. Like I said, I can't applaud them more. It was wonderful. I'm so happy it happened. Day 2 on St. Patrick's Day, I went there, and the first game I saw was I'm getting them confused now.
Mason, Dublin, Jerome.
Mason, Dublin, Jerome. Now, I did not have Mason in my top 5 for Ohio.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. It's hard to be in the top 5
Yeah,
of
I mean
Ohio. It's hard to be in Division 1 and to be top 5. It's hard. I mean, unless you're a great team. Now, I've talked to many coaches there, many travel team coaches, many parents, and I even said it before. I picked 5 teams that I say are the top 5 in Ohio. I wouldn't be shocked if a team that's not in the top 5 wins the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mason could be one of those teams. They're tough. They are tough. Dublin Jerome, also not in my top 5. Every person I talked to about Dublin Jerome, they said they're 1 year away.
Yeah.
They're very young. Now, Dublin Jerome, I thought dominated the game. They had the ball. They moved the ball. They just couldn't get through Mason's D and their goalie. They couldn't. I was in the press box, and other people in the press box with me, and we were all saying the same thing. Like, this is just a strong D. They just can't. And then Mason would come down, and it was almost in transition.
Yeah.
Or unsettled situations that they scored. My player of the game, though. Now, I heard about this player. A coach had reached out to me the day before, and said, "Watch out for Mason. I've coached 8 of the kids on that team.
Yeah.
They are tough. I don't know if anyone will overlook them." He's like, but he actually said, he's like, they're going to win. Now, polling the people that I did beforehand, I'd say it was an 80% Dublin Jerome was going to win.
Yeah. He
came out and said Mason's going to win. Kids are tough. The kid he told me to watch out for was Brendan Malloy, who faces off, plays midi, and he said he's the toughest kid I've ever had. He's got a little bit of a mean streak in him, and he's a great player. And he just had his spleen removed 6 weeks ago.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, as I said, what kind of commitment and loyalty to teammates and competitive spirit to have your spleen removed. Now, I believe for years and years and years before that, he's had medical issues because of the spleen.
Right.
Because I think he was on a U19 or a U15 national team. He had accolades. He's not an unknown entity, but everything sidetracked him because of his health.
Yeah.
So removing the spleen hopefully will alleviate those health issues. But to see how someone wants to get back in a game and play, it's mind-boggling to me, and that's the spirit. I have no doubt that this kid is going to be successful in whatever he does, because it's the drive.
Right.
That's the drive.
That kind of attitude will carry you a long way outside of sport.
And that's what I like sports about. So that's the whole bottom line for me is that. So Brendan Malloy, I'm also going to be reaching out to him later this week. I'm going to write a little story about him because it's just too good of a story.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's too good. And I want to find out what his feelings are and see, how he's feeling.
Right.
Like, how did he feel after that game?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they utilized him like they will in the future.
Right.
So maybe they let him in a little. But he is going to be someone to watch. I mean, I just love that a coach reached out to me the day before and told me about it. So it was like one of those, because I shared it in the press box and everyone looked at me like, what?
Yeah.
6 weeks ago? And I said, yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And so they were all like, I don't want to say they were cheering for him. Like,
right. You can't not. Like, there's an unwritten rule. If you're a reporter in the press box, you generally don't cheer, but every now and then, like, something just happens. Like, you can't help but,
I said,
you can't help but be a fan in some occasions.
Right. I said I had to make him my player of the game, but he also earned the player of the game. I mean, amongst other players, but he won big face-off, scored a goal, did some nice riding. I mean, he played good. I was very, very happy. Again, that's one to watch. Both of those teams, Mason and Dublin Jerome, going to be teams to watch. Yeah. I mean, again, throw out everybody in the top 10 in both divisions. Maybe Division 2, top 6.
Yeah.
Division 1, there are 10 teams that could go at it. I mean, so I will be spending a lot of time in Ohio. I know that, because those are the ones, if I'm going to go with a regional ranking, I've got to know which ones,
Yeah.
You can't get those ones wrong.
Right.
I know. I could pick out 2 in Indiana, usually 2 or 3 in Illinois. Michigan's a little harder.
Right.
Ohio's the one. I mean, because someone can beat somebody every day. So you're going to have to watch. It's very deep. The next game I watched was the Division II champion from last year, St. Francis de Sales of Columbus, who is a team that's loaded with talent. I believe the division aspect in Ohio, so people can understand it, it's not like a level. I think it's a size. The school is under 1,200 or 13. I don't have the numbers with me right now.
Unlike I guess we found out a few weeks ago, Texas does theirs a little bit differently, but I guess from what I'm used to in Maryland, like, it's usually by size of school.
Yeah.
Like, so it's based on enrollment. So however many students are in the school, it'll put you like, level 1, 2, or 3, or A, B, or C, or like however each state does Division 1, 2. Each state's a little bit different, but I think a great majority of the states do something based on enrollment. To, as your point earlier in Indiana, try and make it a little bit more fair. That way, a school that has 300 students enrolled is not going up against a school that has like 5,500, because you pull from a much larger pool of talent, and therefore, like, you can find 12 guys that can play. Whereas if you have a school of 300, you might not be able to find.
Right. Well, let's just say St. Francis de Sales could hold their own against any team in that state.
Yeah, they got a good track record.
Yeah. And I think Chagrin Falls is a pretty darn good team too, and they have a little bit of a rivalry. My phone sort of got a lot of text messages beforehand, because I was tweeting saying, this is going to happen, and then I'd get a message like, Sales is going to kill him. Like, I got a lot of those. So to see Chagrin Falls win was sort of a shock, but it was, now I have to say this because there were some top players missing from DeSales. That's why this one will haunt DeSales.
Right.
I'm sure the revenge when they play them again will be important to them. They had 3 top players that weren't in. But again, that, like I said in the article, you play with the players you have.
Right.
And that's what it is. I mean, what if there's 3 players missing in the state championship? You can't say, well, they're not the championship because we had 3 players out.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
You have to go with the result.
Right. So that was the result. Now, I was looking forward to seeing their goalie, Otto Bergman, who is a returning All-American. He played on the German U19 national team. He's a dual citizen. He's also a hockey player, and he's 6'4". So when I heard of a 6'4" hockey player, I'm like, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
And I thought I would see a plodding 6'4" kid filling up a goal.
Right.
What I've seen before.
Yeah.
This was nothing of the sort. He had the sweatpants and he had the high tops tucked into him, and he was as agile as anyone I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That big, playing lacrosse as a goalie. I mean, that young, and he's just got it. You see it, you see everything about him. You can't take your eyes off him. He made some huge saves in the beginning. At one point, I believe it was 5-2, which is, for that game, Chagrin Falls was winning 5-2
Yeah.
was pretty big. Like
Yeah.
that was now DeSales made a run, tied it up. It was an exciting game. Otto Bergman, I thought, was the difference because in the beginning, DeSales could have got on top of him. He made big saves. He also, I don't think his coach will like me saying this, but one of the attackmen might have gotten a little too close to the crease coming around from the backside, and it was like a hockey goal. He put a shot on him, a little bit of cross check, snapped the stick in two, and it was out for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't condone that. I have a feeling in these games these guys might get a little physical with each other. It was sort of a little message sent. I have to also say we thought that was going to be the point where DeSales would jump on him, and the goalie who came in, they couldn't be more of a polar opposite. I don't know his name. He was a shorter kid, and to come into this situation, like everyone again in the press box were like, just clear the ball, get rid of it. He took 2-3 shots on him and stopped every one of them, and it was sort of fun. But so that was my wonder adventure week, starting from Kentucky, going to Ohio, and then back to Indiana.
Not a bad first week of the season, I'd say.
No. It's a lot of driving, but you can get stuff done when you're driving, talk to people and whatever. So it was fun. I actually really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And obviously just to let everybody know, like we will basically do this every week for as far as like your Midwest, like your travels, and you're also doing a what we're calling the Ward Report, where you'll basically kind of recap this. So if you want to see the players of the game and his kind of take on each of the games, you can look for that every Tuesday evening, and then obviously we'll be doing a Midwest Region Notebook every Tuesday as well. So I think this was the second week for that one. Where you kind of we had real games to talk about. So that was, It's always nice when you have real games. It's no longer a hypothetical and a little bit of an educated guessing game. You actually have real results to talk about. But we kind of want to touch on some of the other areas as well. So like for me, since I have covered, I mean, obviously I originally from North Carolina and, spent 18 years in North Carolina, spent 18 years in Maryland, but I have done the Mid-Atlantic region report for U.S. Lacrosse every year. I think I missed 1 year where I didn't do it, but then I went back last year and decided I just wanted to do it. I do it for myself, like I do it for Lax Records. So I've covered the Mid-Atlantic probably for the better part of a decade, reporting wise. And one of the things that I always found interesting, and it honestly, it's one of those things like how I got the idea to do this. I really can't really tell you, other than it was one of those things that, like, I was interested to find out. But for the last few years, I've gone back and tracked the MIAA versus Interac conference opponents. And for those of you listening, like if you're not familiar with some of the programs, like you'd be the Boys Latin, the McDonoughs, Loyola Blakefield, Calvert Hall. I'm going to miss a team or two because I'm not going to mention them all. And the big ones out of the Interac would be Haverford School and Malvern Prep. Those are in Episcopal Academy. Everybody probably knows Coach Bates, who's now coaching Episcopal Academy. But those are like usually the big ones. But those conferences go head to head every year, and it's always usually the first start of the year. So you talked earlier about, kind of facing that big opponent right off the bat. Like these programs go head to head, and they don't mess around year in, year out, and they always go ahead against each other, usually at the first game of the year. And this year was no different because Haverford School, and I think they started the year ranked, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it's different now anyway since the new ranking came out. I think they were 17th or 18th in the nation, and they were playing Boys Latin, who I think was ranked in the top 10, if not just outside the top 10. And it was one of those, like, Haverford School jumped out to like a 7-0 lead. And it was one of those, like, that shocked a lot of people. I think we talked about it with Ty last week. Like, no one was really expecting that. The game was ended a lot closer, kind of a more result you would anticipate from two programs like that. But because of that, I got the chance to update my my record book. And, the MIA folks would be happy because it's one of the, as we kind of mentioned with Ty Zanders last week as well, like Baltimore, Long Island usually go back and forth about who has the better lacrosse. And the MIA, at least in terms of the Interac versus the Interac conference, gets another year of boasting. Now, I know it's still early and not all the teams have played, but they usually only play like maybe 7 games total, depending on the conference. I think that's probably the max that I have in the since 2002. But the MIA has racked up a 69-47 record against the Interac. in that time. So, I mean, we're talking about, over 100 games have been played between these two conferences, and we're not talking about a ton of teams. I mean, the MIA might have, I think with John Carroll, I'm going to get the number wrong, we'll just say 10 programs in it, but it's not like all 10 play. It's like not like every team from the conference plays each other every year. It really is just mostly Haverford School, Malvern Prep. Germantown Academy does play Episcopal, and like a couple of other programs, but Interact's not as deep as the MIA either. So we're really talking about a handful of teams that play it, because McDonough has won 22 of those out of the MIA, with Loyola Blakefield winning 13, and then Haverford School has 31 of the conference's 47 wins. So they are obviously the team that is taking the lion's share out of those games. But it's just one of those stats, like you kind of start to look at. I mean, we talk about, last week, and Ty talked about the East Coast bias, and I mean, when you're looking at this, you can see why it's easy to fall into that, like why these teams always start the year ranked, because they're going to hammer each other early in the year, and then like, all right, we'll figure it out, after that. And like you start them high, and then they figure it out, and they flush themselves out over the course of the year. But that's always one of my more favorite game matchups when I start the year. I think I think it was maybe Saturday or Sunday, Archbishop Spalding beat Springfield Chestnut Hill. So they were another MIA versus Interact school. So I think the Interact is 1-1. Or no, actually, I'm sorry, because Haverford School went 1-1 against McDonough. So I guess the MIAA has a 2-1 record against the Interact so far this year, but it's still early, and obviously with Lax Power gone, it's a little bit harder to see what those teams' schedules are. So we don't really get to look ahead quite as much as we used to. But I don't know if there's anything quite as comparable in the Midwest that you're aware of, as far as something like that, where like really two power conferences matching up.
No, there's not. I want it to be. I want to be able to say there is, but there isn't. People might want to say there is,
right?
But the MIAA is the best high school conference in lacrosse. If we're going on the East Coast, strictly East Coast, I tend to be for Long Island.
Right.
That's where it started. So I always like to say I'm Long Island against Maryland. You're a Maryland guy. I'm a Long Island. So I'll always come from the Long Island part. You're always coming from the Maryland. But I think as far as the depth, really, you can't say,
it's a narrow concept. When you look at it, Long Island is a much bigger area.
Right.
When you're talking about the MIA, you're really talking Baltimore. I know
right.
St. Mary's is in Annapolis, which isn't obviously in Baltimore, but you're really talking Baltimore. Loyola Blakefield's in Towson. It's basically Baltimore.
Right.
It's one of those, like, it's a lot of the. I remember driving from St. Paul's to Boys Latin to Gilman, and I think I forget how many, there's like 15 miles separates the two.
Right,
Gilman
but it could be 2 hours to drive.
Yeah, well, I don't know. After being in Chicago, I really would take some Baltimore traffic. It's nowhere near as much, but it's just one of those, like, that's, for me, it's one of those, and it's because the two conferences obviously have their share of talent and D1 players and legendary coaches. There's a list of reasons why, but I guess for me, it's always one of those, like, they don't have to play. It'd be very easy for Haverford School or Boys Latin or one of those other teams, like, go play someone else in the early part of the year. The Haverford Boys Latin game was literally both teams' first game of the year, and you're talking about, like, all right, this is two teams that, and it's one of those, like, each of those teams we know are not, their goal is not to finish number one in the nation. Their goal is to win their conference championship. Right. So that game really, as we've talked, it means nothing in terms of that. Like, that game, it's fun for fans. It's fun for fans of the conference. It's good for people who do rankings, like, because you kind of get that head-to-head kind of thing. But, it's one of those, like, I guess I just kind of respect all the teams and the coaches in that conference, because I'm like, they're not – it'd be really easy to be like, oh, we're going to go play someone else that we know we can beat, and it may not be as much of a challenge, but those teams just go at it year in, year out, and those conferences go at it year in, year out, and for me, it's just fun. It's one of those things I look forward to every year. In fact, I think I sent some tweets to Booker Corrigan's way before, when they announced that their television schedule,
which is great.
They usually had a Interac MIAA game on tap for like early in the season. Like they usually had one of those early, and then they took a big break, and they would have the MIAA schedule. And he said they weren't doing it this year, and it was kind of like, oh man, like it was one of those like I was kind of sad I didn't get to watch it. But Boys Latin was doing a play-by-play or a scoring update on their some app called Haptastic, and I was in a Potbelly sandwich waiting to go see. I was on my way to see Captain Marvel that night. And I was literally sitting in a Potbelly, like refreshing the app over and over again because it was 7-0, and then all of a sudden it was like 10-7. You're like, holy crap! It's like this is a comeback. I mean, it's as good as you can get when you're located in Chicago and you're trying to watch lacrosse because it's not like many of them are live broadcast to begin with, much less at a time in which you can get it, and you take what you can get when you can get it, basically.
Right. I mean, but the MIAA games you can get online. I mean,
yes, they do.
With Booker Corrigan.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. And I think Coach Bob Shriver, Boys Latin legend, all-time winningest coach, I think he's the color guy in that. And they're a hoot to watch. Go at it, go back and forth as well. So they're fun games. So if you can find them, like they're good games to watch. And I mean, there's some teams I think like Georgetown Prep, like. Obviously, it's one of those, like, with a smartphone, I'm finding more and more people. Like, I think I just opened Twitter one day last week, and I think Bullis was just live streaming it on Twitter. Like, I'm assuming someone just probably had their phone out. I mean, you don't get any play-by-play. You get crowd noise. You don't know what the score is. So if you tune in late, you have no idea what's going on unless someone flashes to the scoreboard. But you may not even know who they're playing if you're just tuning in and not really watching. But it was just one of those, like I said, you take it where you can get it this time of year. I don't have... I don't get the luxury of going to as many games as you have over the last, like I have my schedule set, like I'm going to St. Louis here in a couple weeks, and then I am going to go to that. I am heading back east to Long Island for that Geico tournament, just because that was too good to pass up with the amount of coaches. It's for me, it's always one of those things, like it's fun to see some of the coaches that I've communicated with over the years, but never actually met, because they're located in Massachusetts and Connecticut. So I have my schedule. Just I'm jealous of you being able to get to travel quite as much and go to see the amount of teams. But I'm going to get to as many as I can. Like I do have it on my schedule to see the South Elgin team. So I know that you were curious about them because you were hearing they were possible. And obviously Cade Newton, I think he'll probably hit 300 points probably this week. 300 career points, because I think I had looked at his stats and he's 4 points away now, I believe. I do so many stats updates during the week. I think that's his. But I think they recently had another kid just commit to college. So they got a couple college-bound kids on their team. So I'm looking forward to seeing them this year as well. But yeah, and before I kind of leave the Mid-Atlantic, I do kind of want to give a big shout-out to Jacob Angelis. He's a Johns Hopkins commit out of Paul VI, because he ended up as the program's all-time leading scorer. And I mean, I can't speak highly enough of Coach Bob Waters at Paul VI, because I forget how many years he's been there now. I think this is his 6th year. I'm in the ballpark. I might not be exactly right, but I know I'm in the ballpark at how many years. And I remember talking to him when he took over the program, and he got his welcome to the world of national lacrosse pretty quick, because I think he beat Georgetown Prep, which was nationally ranked, I think in one of his first few games of his head coaching career. Like, he had been an assistant at a public school in Virginia for a number of years, and then he took the head coaching job at Paul VI, and nobody saw them coming. Paul VI was not a national power by any means at that point in time, and he took over, and I think in his first year he beat Georgetown Prep when Coach Giblin was there, and that kind of stood everybody on their rear. They're like, wait a minute, and everybody thought it was a fluke, and I forget who they beat again, but they beat a couple teams that year, and it really kind of was like, everybody's like, whoa, what's going on here? And then they graduated some people, and they took maybe half a step back the next year, but then they've proven they are for real, and Coach Waters knows what he's doing. So I mean, for Jacob to actually get that program's all-time leading scorer is an impressive feat. He's over 300 career points now, so he's another kid. I mean, he's a Johns Hopkins commit. He's not an unknown.
Right.
People know who he is. Like, I've done videos and articles on him, because he's one of the guys that I'm looking at for potential player of the year, because it's one of those with the conference he plays in and the schedule they play, and his talent level just kind of warrants me, like, all right, this is a kid that could end up, with a very stellar career. Like, I think about Jeffrey Connor with Strathaven last year. Like, he was not a guy that I had on my radar. Not that's inaccurate. He was on my radar. I knew who he was, but I didn't have him in for Player of the Year contention early in the season. But and obviously he's going to Virginia, so he's talented. But he had such a phenomenal senior season. Like it was a blast to, I'll say watch, just because I don't know. I didn't get to literally watch it, but it's one of those you get to see how these kids' season unfolds. Like every now and then you get a kid that they've had good careers and then they just have that breakout season where they just play lights out. And those are the fun seasons to kind of watch when a kid's just like, the net is, it looks like a soccer goal to them. Like, they can't miss. So, I think Jacob's one of those guys, like he has the potential based on the season he had last year, like, and his start to the season through 4 games, he could be one of those guys we're looking at another, pretty big season. So I've had a couple good achievements for the past week as well.
And it's the first week.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think like I'm, because I do the Mid-Atlantic and then I do kind of the National Notebook. And I was looking, I was talking with one of the guys in California who does the St. Ignatius Prep Twitter. And I've known him for say known, like we know each other through Twitter for years. And I was commenting, like I had initially written, because Torrey Pines had rolled through 3 opponents from 3 different states last week. And Torrey Pines was, I think we were talking before we started the podcast, they were, I think, the only team from California to start in Inside Lacrosse's top 25. And they are power program. I think they're coming east. I forget who they're playing, but I think they are coming east this year. And but they played Loyola Los Angeles, which I think was Max Lax LA's number 1 team out of Los Angeles. They played Philip Andover out of Massachusetts, one of the prep school programs, and they played the Woodlands out of Texas, which is the defending Texas state champ, and they beat all 3 of them. And it was one of those, like, I'd kind of written that part up, and I mean, it was 13-8 over Loyola Los Angeles, 18-4 over Phillips Andover, and 6-4 over the Woodlands. So, I mean, they showed pretty well, and so you're starting to look at them like, man, this team they're looking good. They're beating several teams. Like, Phillips Andover's a pretty legendary. I mean, their list of alumni would be pretty impressive up against most colleges. We're talking about a prep school. But then it was funny because I had already written that, and then St. Ignatius Prep out of San Francisco, which is obviously north, they beat Loyola Los Angeles, and then they turned around and beat Torrey Pines. And St. Ignatius Prep is not an unknown. Like I was kind of explaining it to you a couple years ago, they beat Chaminade, and that's always the game that people have pointed to as far as like like they're for real, because as we've talked in the past, like you go east, you beat a team, and then people take notice. Like that's better or worse, that's just the way it is. And I was talking with the guy on Twitter, and he was like, yeah, it's the unofficial California state championship. And I thought about it. I was like, that's kind of right, because for anybody who doesn't know, California doesn't have a state title. I think the state's just probably just too big, and there's too many teams for them. Like I don't think they do a state championship in any sport, so it's not just lacrosse. They do what they call it's the CIF. It's kind of like want to think about it, section championships. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. So they don't have like a true state champion, but if you think about it, like in lacrosse, like that could have been the Loyola or the Los Angeles area champion, probably the Orange County champion, and then St. Ignatius Prep, they play in the WCAL, so they don't play for that kind of championship. But I'm like, yeah, it's as close as you're going to get to a potential California championship game. So it's just kind of one of those, like you start looking at the results throughout the country, and it just, for me, it's fun. It's like, and you think like, well, California's not in their first week of the season, but for me, when all the states start to get ramped up, you start to look, and it starts to feel a little bit more real. I think it sinks in at this point in the year when you're like, all right, we have, some of the East Coast. I mean, New Jersey, well, by the time you're listening to this, New Jersey will have started, but from where we're recording on Tuesday night, New Jersey's still a day away from starting. Obviously, the entire Northeast, well, New York has started, but, up north, they have not started yet. So, I mean, we're still not even fully ramped up at this point in the season. I mean, we're talking, we're in the second week of March, almost third week of March. It's just kind of funny to think about that, like, we're still not even all in gear at this point.
Right. I mean, Michigan starts today. Or, I mean, they had a few games last week, but they go full out now. I mean,
yeah.
So that's compared to Indiana and Illinois, it's like 1 week behind or later, however you want to put it that way.
Yeah, and I don't know how some of the schools in Indiana or Illinois do it, but I know like some of the teams are breaking for spring break. Like they've played a couple games, and now like
Right.
For the college I work at, their spring break was last week, and then I know some high schools will be doing. I think my wife's spring break is in like another week or two, so it's like now spring breaks start to come up, which allows some teams to travel, and then other teams just don't play.
Right.
So it's just kind of like you get a little bit of a break, but I think by the time most people are listening to this, we'll kind of start to get more states kind of geared up. And I guess to kind of roll out, like, not an unintentional segue, but I know probably in your ward report you had talked about Loyola and where they're heading this week. So I know you're not traveling with them, but why don't we kind of, for the people who are listening today, like, why don't you kind of, because their schedule is pretty brutal, and anybody who's listening to this based on the East Coast would be an impressive schedule for any team to face. So why don't you kind of fill us in on what Loyola's up to this week and what's going on? Because we'll probably hear about it in next week's Midwest Report, I'm sure.
Yeah. So this week, it's going for it. I mean, when you say going for it,
yeah.
And when we talked to Ty last week, and he just when I told him the 6 teams they were playing, he started shaking his head.
Yeah.
This week they are going to Baltimore to play Bullis, who was number 8. Well, I don't know if the rankings came out. Bullis was number 8 in the country.
Yeah.
Then they were playing Georgetown Prep the next day, who was number 17 in the country.
Yeah.
And then the day after that, they were playing Calvert Hall, who's number 4 in the country. Now, those rankings might have changed a little bit. Needless to say, these are not the top teams out there. These are the top teams in the country.
And it's worth noting that Bullis is the defending IAC champion, which, for context, that's the same conference that Georgetown Prep and Landon in. So just trying to give people know what the teams they might have heard year in, year out. And Calvert Hall is the 2-time defending MIA A-Conference championship, and they're trying to do if they win it this year, which is a huge if, and any coach in the MIA will tell you it is a near Herculean feat, but I don't think that there's another team that has done it 3 times in a row, and it was Loyola Blakefield, and I want to say it was in the late 80s. So it's not just any 3 teams out of the East Coast.
Right. They are going for it. And here's, am I giving an excuse already? Maybe. They're missing 3 All-Americans. And that's a problem because 2 of them are still hockey players, and Loyola Academy happens to be in the state championship, which is Friday night. So
I see the billboard every day on my way home.
they can't make it. So, and as I talked to Coach Schneider about it, and I said, and he said, it might be ugly, but it's going to be great for us. He said, it's going to be great for us. Like, he wasn't making any excuses. He's like, it's going to get some freshmen, some sophomores, the best experience. I mean, again, for Loyola, it's about a state championship. It's not about being in the national conversation. For me, it's about the national conversation. For people in the Midwest, it's about maybe getting a team in the national conference. But he is all about making his team as sharp as possible to win the state championship.
Yeah.
So I can't wait for that. Regardless, I want to see it. I want to hear about it. I will not be able to go. It's a pain having kids, No, I'm kidding. It's a joke. And having a wife that has to be out of town for work. That's the reason. So instead, I will be in Michigan to see Brother Rice, to see Forest Hills. So I'm still getting my fix.
Yeah.
That just would have been the best one. So that's, and as we talked about, if they could make a bang out there, if Loyola could make a bang, and this is what I said in the Ward report, all the Midwest teams, even New Trier, even St. Viator, even their biggest competitors in Illinois, should be pulling for Loyola. Because if they can go out there and knock off one of those teams, knock off 2 of those teams. I mean, last year they went 5-6 on their East Coast trip, beat the number 6 team in the country at the time, Victor. So they're not
5-1. Or they go 5?
Yeah, they won 5 out of 6. Or
okay.
Yeah, they went 5-1. Yeah, 5 out of 6. Right. Either way.
Just before we got a tweet saying, "No, you were wrong about that." We try to cut it off at the. Anybody who was going to send it probably already sent it, but at least we.
And their loss last year was to West Jenny. I mean,
who made the conference? Who made the state championship?
A legendary team.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so legendary. There is a drill called West Jenny. I
Yeah.
mean, that's, if you're wondering, you hear the West Jenny drill, it's from that team. So, so this will be a big week. And like we were saying, if Loyola is supposed to do well, can do well, shows up well, well, then they come back to the Midwest, and they're going to play the teams from the Midwest. And sitting there waiting for them is New Trier, their biggest rival. It's always New Trier Loyola for the championship. The last, I don't know. Well, then New Trier is going to play Brother Rice. New Trier is going to play. I think they play Upper Arlington. I know they play DCC. So it like pollinates throughout the Midwest. So again, it's not an exact science, and any team could beat anyone else. But if you could sit there and say, "Hey, Loyola beat Georgetown Prep, and Georgetown Prep's a top 10 team," then came back and New Trier beat them, and then New Trier went up and lost to Brother Rice, and then it just gives. It shows better, I think, for the Midwest. You know. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked. I mean, I don't have St. Ignatius's prep schedule in front of me, man. That's a tongue twister. But you know, if I'm at Torrey Pine School, it's like even though they beat you, and you might want to be like, oh, I want to see them go down. Like when they go back east, you want them.
You want to win.
You go 3-0, like crush, like just pound all those opponents, because then a narrow 2-goal loss to us looks a lot better. Like, you know, it puts them, it's like, oh, you know, if, you know, Loyola Academy goes out and goes 3-0, and then New Trier loses by 1, be like, well, if they beat Calvert Hall by 6 and New Trier only loses by 1, like, it's just one of those, like, all right, you know, it's like you said, rising tide lifts all boats. Like, you start to look at the other programs they're playing and be like, oh, you know, these other teams are, you know, you kind of, I mean, at this point in time, like, that's really what it is. Like, if you want to get national recognition in terms of, you know, if that's your thing, honestly, most coaches I talk to, they don't care. Like, it's state championship, it's improving their players. Like, they're not worried. They're like, I think years and years ago, Coach Nostrand told me, he was like, that's for you guys to talk about. He's like, that's not something, he's like, we never discussed that. He was like, that is not part of our pregame, postgame, or any game speech that we ever give the kids ever. It's like, they don't care. It's not the thing. So it's, you know, it's fun for people like us to talk about and for fans. And that's really the point of rankings in general, is just to kind of lend some context to the conversation. So when you see teams that are heading east and playing teams, like, and then they come back home and play others, like, that's really kind of where you start to kind of get that context of what's going on nationally, and be like, oh, you know, they went out and beat this program. I mean, it is one of those things, like when Loyola Academy beat Victor, I mean, a lot of people took notice, like, oh, wait, like, and I mean, Victor won state championship. I mean, they are not without their talented players, so it's like, wasn't just one of those, like, you didn't go out and just beat a team. Like, I remember, I think it was Mercer Island out of Washington beat Duxbury out of Massachusetts a few years ago, and that was one of those, you're like, whoa, what's going on there? Like, it's just like, you just start to, like, you can't help but take notice when some of those teams win, and it's like they put you on your radar, and they may not get a ranking right then and there, but you start to recognize those names and those programs year after year. And I mean, I think everybody kind of, when you start to notice them, they just become part of the conversation. I mean, be honest, Boys Latin didn't start off with Boys Latin. Like, they all started with, you know, they earned that over decades. Like, it wasn't just one of those things, like, you don't just get that kind of mystique surrounding you just because you show up one day. Like, that stuff is earned, and it's earned through, you know, blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of hard work. So, I mean, I applaud, you know, Loyola Academy for going east. It's kind of a shame that, you know, those hockey finals are right in the midst of that trip, but I think they're probably on their spring break, which probably makes it easier for them to go, which probably makes it also easier for them to play a hockey state championship on a Friday night. So.
Right. Well, they'll also be out in Long Island too. There's the other half of their 3 games that they're playing, St. Anthony's, Chaminade, and Garden City. So all top 10 ranked teams in the country.
Yeah.
They should be full-handed then, so you never know. But I will say this about, for teams that aren't out east, the Midwest teams, the teams from the South, the teams from the West, beating those teams where it doesn't matter, you know, being in a national talk.
Right.
What it does do is it gets more college coaches looking.
Yeah.
It's very easy to recruit when you only have to go into Baltimore to Long Island and sit there and say, I can get all of my players right from here. You know, there's 3 major you got Johns Hopkins, Maryland, Loyola.
Well,
they can come out their back door
Towson
and go watch and take a drive and go see some of the best players in the country.
Yeah.
So there's no impetus for them to leave, to go look. Well, if you start coming out there and start beating their teams, they're going to have to start moving and start coming out there. And if they come out to see, if Loyola beats one of those teams, they say, oh my gosh, we go check them out. And they go, let's go out there and check them out on their own thing. And they're playing New Trier. All of a sudden, although New Trier gets a lot of D1 kids, Brother Rice, lots of,
right.
But you know what? It brings more eyes, which will lift everybody. And then it spreads, and that's when you can spread out. Now, I've said this before, too. I think there is more D1 talent than there are D1 teams at this point. I don't even know if people know the depth of lacrosse in California, in Texas, in Florida.
Yeah.
And so when everyone's like, oh, he's a D1 player, he's a D1 player. Yeah, he's a D1 player, but he might go play at Wesleyan, you know?
Right.
Because that's an awesome team and an awesome school.
Right.
So I just to go on that high horse again, just because you're not playing D1, if you're playing D2 or D3, there's guys who are playing in the MCLA who are D1 players.
Right.
You know, it's so when you can get those big games and get the notoriety, that's where it's important to us in the Midwest, in the South, in the West.
Yeah. And just to kind of, I guess maybe put a period on that thought is, I remember years ago I was standing on the sideline. It was a tournament event, and I was talking to a coach, a college coach, and we were talking. I was like asking him kind of about recruiting. I was like, oh, so what are you looking for when you come to an event like this? Like, are you guys, do you have your list of players that you're looking for? Is like, are you looking for that needle in a haystack, that, you know, little rough diamond in that or is like, what are you looking for? And so we just kind of got to chatting about that, and then I forget the question I asked him. He was like, listen, he's like, I'll be perfectly honest. He was like, even if I see a kid out here that I really like, he was like, the kid has to be very special for us to truly recruit him. Now, this wasn't a top D1 program, but he was like, he's like, our philosophy is like, we will take the third line midfielder from a Haverford school or a boys Latin before we take a first line from a program that we don't know as well, because we know the level of competition that Haverford school, and it was Haverford school that he mentioned, like, not to say that they were taking a third line, but that was the example. He's like, we know the competition at Haverford school, we know the coach, we know the offense. Like, we know enough about that program to know that we are getting a kid that he is polished, he's well coached, and he knows what he's doing. He was like, so we don't have to, he's like, it was just that level. He's like, we don't know, some of these other areas are just unknown. Like, they're just not as familiar with him. So I think it even follows, like, you know, to your point, like, college coaches, like, it helps them kind of see, like, you know, I mean, I think you mentioned one of the earlier podcasts, like, if you play well against Culver Academy, even if your team gets blown out 26-0, like, that should just be your highlight tape, because coaches want to know that, like, this is what he did against Culver.
Right.
And considering Culver is basically a Division I program with the amount of kids that are playing, like, they're a Division I, like, if they see what you're doing against that level of competition, like, that's what I mean. The Loyola Academy kids, like, this East Coast trip, that should just be their highlight reel. Like, no matter what happens, if you play well, this is 6 games you're going to use. That'll be our highlight. Like, because those are known programs that college coaches would then look at them like, oh, he did it against Boys Latin, or Bullis, Georgetown Prep, and Calvert Hall.
Right.
The coaches know them. They know the quality of players that those programs have. So when you see they're playing against, like, I've had it in all sports. Like, I've had it in basketball and football when I've covered there. Like, you know, yeah, you can run for 200 yards against, you know, a no-name program. Doesn't, you know, okay, great, wonderful for you. He was like, but for the recruiting aspect, they're like, we would rather see a hard 30-yard game where to see what you're made of, rather than a 200-yard game where it's just like, oh, you put in quarter effort.
Right.
So there's a lot to it. I mean, even if the name of the game is not to get ranked, like if you want to get kids noticed, if you're a kid and you want to play in college, if you have aspirations, like this is your chance. Like these types of games, this is your chance against programs, because those college coaches, there's just not enough college teams. And we've talked before, the budget is, I mean, it's not football. Like these programs aren't getting thousands and thousands of dollars to travel the country to.
No one's giving them a private jet to fly somewhere. Like Nick Saban is going to. He's on a private jet.
Funny, I have a football related story, but I remember watching DeMatha and Good Counsel, their football program, and play at Good Counsel at Olney, Maryland. It is 50 minutes from University of Maryland at College Park. TV was on ESPN. We were there. I was working for ESPN at the time. We were watching. The game was on TV. Game was sold out. I think it was halftime. A helicopter flies in and lands kind of a little bit further. I didn't even know there was a place for the program to land. Ralph Friedgen gets off the plane to watch the second half of the DeMatha Good Counsel game, because basically, like, a lot of DeMatha players would go on to the University of Maryland, and we're sitting there like, Ralph, you could have watched this game. Like, you could have driven. He's landing in a helicopter. Like, it was just one of those things. Like, you just kind of realize, like, all right, when you're playing Division I football, like, it's a different thing. Like,
it's a whole different world.
There's no lacrosse coaches landing in a helicopter anywhere in the country to go watch the second half of a game.
They might have to expense the rental car. I mean, that's their here. They have to pay for it and get the money back.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different world in terms of that. So yeah, this is a lot of kids' chance to, make their highlight reel for the year, win or lose, no matter what. So, but I think that's a good enough place to end, because, like, obviously we're talking about games that, I guess, as you are listening to this, listener, will have already happened. But we are doing a little preview from our perspective. But Michael, you will have recaps. I'm sure we'll have something on that, because there's just too good not to. In the Midwest Region Report, which will come out on Tuesday of this week. It will come out every Tuesday. And then the Ward Report, I guess we'll assume we'll have some of your more travels and players of the game, so you can look for that on laxrecords.com as well. But Michael, where can they find you in the interim online if they want to follow your take as you travel the globe?
I'm on Twitter at MFWCHI. You can email me at mward@laxrecords.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and Michael Ward. I never thought about that, but I have a lot of people who've mentioned stuff on LinkedIn. So look me up on LinkedIn. And I'm always willing to talk, always willing to, respond. So, reach out.
Yeah. And then you can find me at Lax Records on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, obviously laxrecords.com. We are creeping ever so close to 100 subscribers on YouTube. I think when I checked earlier today, we're at 69. So once we get to 100, we can actually have the, I believe, youtube.com/laxrecords. So we are creeping ever so close, and that I published, obviously, if you're watching this video, it's a little bit redundant, but the video version of the podcast releases in conjunction with the audio on Sundays as well. And then I do a weekly highlight show, which I actually thought of a name for. I'm going to call it This Week in Lacrosse, because it seemed as fitting as anything else, and it describes what you're getting. So that comes out every Monday. And then I'm kind of toying around with the Thursday stuff that I was doing. I was doing a Throwback Thursday, but I have an idea of maybe trying to do something live each Friday, just kind of look at, because so much happens during the week that I'm literally making notes, and it just feels too good to keep to myself at some point. So if that's something you would like to see, I would definitely like to hear, or if you have another idea of stuff you guys want to see. So if you guys have ideas for topics, or have anything that you want Michael and I to discuss, you can reach out to us on Twitter, email, however you best want to get in touch with us. So but until then, everybody, have a week.
See ya.